Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is David Shattuck, and the topic for this video is the blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the future of everything. This presentation is actually one that I prepared for a lunch and learn in my office last year. It was very well received, and indeed I have since been invited to give the presentation on multiple other occasions. And the most common question that I have been asked has been, is there a copy of this presentation available online so that I can rewatch it and or share it with my friends? And now, before today, my answer to the question has always been no, but now, well, obviously here we are. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. The case can be made, I think, that blockchain is the most important contribution that computer science has made to the world in the past decade. Now, before anyone jumps down to the comments to leave some angry notes, I am perfectly well aware that The Witcher 3, Grand Theft Auto 5, and BioShock Infinite have all been released in the last 10 years. I have considered that carefully, and I stand by what I said. My hope is that by the time this presentation is over, even if you're not willing to go with me quite that far, you will at least have a new appreciation for the extraordinary potential of this technology. So a quick intro slide. My name again is David Shattuck. I am a senior software engineer at Smart Data in Miamisburg, Ohio. I did my graduate work in computer science at Elmhurst and my undergrad at Cedarville. This is my email address. If you'd like to drop me a line, I would be glad to hear from you. None of this stuff is immediately relevant to the content of this presentation. What is relevant, though, is that I have been a cryptocurrency slash blockchain enthusiast since 2013. As soon as I saw Bitcoin, I recognized it. I said, this is amazing. It's going to change the world, and I want to be a part of it. I want to participate in it. I want to help move the revolution forward in any way I can. Quick look at the agenda. This is going to be roughly chronologically ordered. We're going to start at the very beginning with the origins of blockchains, how it came to be. We're going to talk about the very first blockchain project, which was Bitcoin. We're going to talk about how that system works. Then we're going to expand that a little bit into the wider cryptocurrency discussion. And from there, we're going to move into the Ethereum project, which is another big important player in the blockchain space. We're going to have a brief look at some of the other interesting projects in the space, and then I'm going to pull out my crystal ball and we're going to talk about what tomorrow is going to hold for us, what it has in store. Okay, let's go ahead and get into it. Any history of blockchain can and must always begin with the person Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, Satoshi is a figure totally shrouded in mystery. We don't know what his real name is. We don't know what country he's from. We don't know how old he is. We don't know if he's a man or a woman, perhaps a group of people. We don't even know if he's still alive. No one has heard from him in about 7 years. So no one really knows if he's even living anymore. He is the inventor of blockchain. He is the creator of Bitcoin. He gave these things to the world for free and then vanished. As I mentioned, no one has heard from him since about 2011. So the question then is, what exactly did Satoshi do? Well, it's worth noting, I think, that Bitcoin was not the world's first attempt at electronic currency, or e-cash. Indeed, there were many predecessors to Bitcoin, but all of them failed because they were all plagued by the same set of nigh intractable problems. What Satoshi did on October 31st, 2008, was to publish a white paper titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And in this white paper, he described a computer system or a network of computers working together that he claimed solved these problems. And some of these problems were nothing to sneeze at. Indeed, one problem in particular, called the so-called Byzantine general problem, has been an open question in computer science since the 70s, with a lot of people just saying, yeah, it's just an unsolvable problem. Satoshi came along and said, here's a solution, and by the way, I've already built it. Now, we don't have time to go into all the details of what these problems were that he solved, but take my word for it, this paper was amazing. It is difficult to overstate its importance, at least in the context of this presentation. So So the name that he gave to his invention was blockchain. So what exactly is a blockchain? Well, on this slide, I want to offer what I think is the simplest, most basic, most non-technical description of what a blockchain is, or at least what it looks like. So let's imagine that this tall, thin rectangle is actually a very long piece of paper. It's 8.5 inches wide and infinity inches long. Let's also imagine that we have a transaction that has happened. Alice has given Bob $10. This is an important event. We want to remember that it happened, so we're going to write it down. We're going to write it down on our piece of paper, and there it is right there. Now, as time goes on, uh, more people do more transactions. People are sending money back and forth. They're buying and selling things, so forth and so on. These are all important things that have happened. We want to remember them all, so we continue writing them on our paper. New transactions go to the bottom of the list, and again, this list goes on forever. It's infinity long, and it's transactions all the way down. Now, many of you have probably seen this before. This is what's called in the business world a ledger. This is just a list of transactions. You can look at all the transactions, positive and negative, for any account or person, and figure out, what balance that person has. So let's imagine now that we take this list of transactions and we cut it up into pieces that are roughly block-shaped, wink, and then we organize these blocks in a pattern that is kind of chain-shaped, wink. This is a blockchain, sort of. It's kind of what a blockchain looks like. Obviously, real blockchains have more interesting properties that give them all their magical powers, but when I use the word blockchain, this is kind of the image I'd like you to have pictured. We have clumps of transactions that are grouped together and added one at a time to the end of the chain. Notice on the very left side of the screen, we have the first block that has no predecessors, and then to the right of them, every new block is added, and then the chain continues on forever off the screen to the right. Now again, I'd like you to preserve this image of a blockchain in your mind. This is our foundation point. We're going to build on this, but I'd also like you to remember these two terms that I've been using because I'm going to keep using them in the next 10-15 minutes or so. The first term is transaction. A transaction is just an exchange of value from one person to another. And the second term is block. A block is just a group of transactions that have been clumped together into a single unit and added to the blockchain as a whole. Okay, so what can you do with a technology like this? Well, the first and most obvious use case is to make a currency. So that's what Satoshi did. On January 3rd, 2009, Satoshi mined the Genesis block, and thus was born Bitcoin, and thus began the blockchain era. So let's talk about how Bitcoin works. The Bitcoin network is made up of several thousand independently owned and operated computers that are all communicating with each other to share transactions and blocks so that everyone's up to date, everyone's up to speed, and they're doing this by following this. They're all following the same set of rules. That rules are often called the protocol. So to understand the behavior of these computers, the computers, by the way, are called nodes. I'd like to zoom in on one specific node and talk about what it's doing in its day-to-day work. So this slide represents one node on the Bitcoin network, or one computer that is connected to the Bitcoin system. Every node on the Bitcoin network has two things. Number one, it has a complete copy of the blockchain. So every single transaction, every single block that has ever been mined on the Bitcoin system, every full node on the Bitcoin network has a copy of that blockchain. The second thing that every Bitcoin node has is what's called a mempool. The mempool is just the collection of transactions that this node knows about that have not yet been added to a block on the blockchain. You can think of this mempool as a waiting room. This is the queue that new transactions are put into as they're waiting their turn to be added to the blockchain. So let's talk about what the node does in its day-to-day activities. So we're a node here, and let's imagine that a new transaction has just come in from one of our peers. Someone has made a Bitcoin transaction. We are just now hearing about it. We are going to ask the question, is this a valid transaction? We'll talk in a minute about what it means for a transaction to be valid. But for now, we're just being general here. Is this a valid transaction? If the answer is no, we're just going to throw the transaction in the trash can. We're just going to ignore it. We don't care about invalid transactions. We're just going to get rid of it. If it is a valid transaction, we're going to add it to our mempool, and then we're going to send the transaction to all of our peers. Now, using this mechanism, when a transaction is broadcast to the Bitcoin network, it is propagated around the world within a couple of seconds, and of course, it's been validated thousands of times by all the different nodes. So the other thing that it's possible for a node to receive is a block. Again, this is a clump of transactions that have been added to the end of the blockchain. We are again going to ask the question, is this a valid node? Or excuse me, is this a valid block? If it's not a valid block, we're just going to throw it in a trash can. If it is a valid block, we are going to add it to the end of our copy of the blockchain. We are going to remove from the mempool all of the transactions that were included in that block. And then we're going to send the block again to all of our peers. And using this mechanism, when a new block is found, it is propagated around the world within a couple of seconds. Okay, let's talk now about what it means for a transaction to be valid. Every player in the Bitcoin space, every user of the Bitcoin network, has what is called a private key. Now, there's nothing magical about this key. It's just a really big number. Now, it's a secret number, so no one knows what it is except for the person who has it. But when you get right down to it, it's just a big number. Now, the Bitcoin software uses this number to create a public key. Now, it uses elliptic curve multiplication, which is some sort of mathematical mumbo jumbo. I don't really know how that works. What's important to our conversation here is that this is a one-way street. You can use a private key to figure out a public key, but you cannot use a public key to calculate the private key. So it's perfectly safe to share the public key because it cannot be used to figure out the private key. Now, the Bitcoin software does another, or the wallet software does another step where it takes the public key and uses a hashing function to figure out a Bitcoin address. Once again, we have a one-way street where a public key can be used to figure out a Bitcoin address, but you can't use a Bitcoin address to figure out a public key. What this means then is that a Bitcoin address is perfectly safe to share with anyone. Here, for example, is my Bitcoin address. You are an internet full of strangers. I don't know almost any of you, yet I am perfectly happy to share my Bitcoin address with you. This is my real, actual Bitcoin address, and I invite you to copy it down, share it with all your friends, do whatever you want with it. The reason for that is because if someone has your Bitcoin address, the only thing they can do with it is send you Bitcoins. So again, it's perfectly safe to share this with people. As a quick aside, as a quick thought exercise, would you be willing to put your credit card information on a screen like this on an internet video, or your bank account number and all that information? My suspicion is probably not, and we'll talk about why cryptocurrency is a lot safer than other existing payment systems in a little bit. Okay, for now, we have our public address, we have our private keys. Let's, again, plug this into our conversation about Bitcoin transactions. So let's imagine that we have two people. We have Alice and Bob. Bob builds things, and he has just finished a construction project for Alice, and so now we want to have a transaction where Alice pays Bob for the work that he's just done. Here's how that plays out. First of all, Bob is going to give Alice his Bitcoin address. And remember, this is a public address. It's perfectly safe to share with anyone, so there is no danger in Bob giving Alice his address. Alice is going to use her Bitcoin software to create a Bitcoin transaction, and the Bitcoin software is going to construct a transaction that contains three things. Number one, this transaction is going to contain Alice's address. Number two, it's going to contain the amount of Bitcoins that Alice wants to send to Bob. And number three, it's going to contain the destination. It's going to contain Bob's address. So this is the from, the to, and the amount. That's what's contained in here. Now, in addition to these three things, Alice is also going to add what's called an encumbrance. This is a locking script that basically makes it so that those coins that are being sent cannot be sent again by anyone unless they control the private key that was used to generate Bob's public address. So basically, once this transaction goes out, no one can send these coins again except Bob. Now, you could probably put the pieces together and figure out that in addition to the encumbrance, we're also going to need to include a release or an unlocking script. Whoever sent these coins to Alice in the first place will have put an encumbrance on that transaction, and so Alice needs to prove using her private key that she is the one who controls this address, and so she therefore has the authority to send these coins. Now, that all sounds complicated and technical, but the software that you use handles all this stuff. So it's perfectly possible that neither Alice nor Bob understand how the system works, but they can still nonetheless use the software. And this, by the way, what I'm showing on the screen, this is a simplified version of a transaction. The real one, obviously, there's more going on, but this gives you a complete picture, I think, of the important pieces. Okay, so Alice's software has constructed this transaction. Everything's signed. It's ready to go. When it's done, though, Alice doesn't give the transaction to Bob. Rather, what she does is that she broadcasts it to the Bitcoin network. Let's pretend that we've got Alice here on the top right corner. This is Bob's node down here on the bottom left corner. Alice is going to broadcast that transaction to all of the nodes that she knows about. Those nodes are going to perform that transaction validation process that I talked about earlier when we were zoomed in on the one node. Those nodes are going to validate the transaction and then broadcast it to all of their nodes, all of their peers. And within a couple of seconds, the transaction has been broadcast around the world. Bob's node sees it, and he can say, okay, I see that I have been paid, and then he's good to go. Okay, so real quick, let's hop over to a browser here. This website, blockchain.info, or blockchain.com, is redirected to it, is a node on the Bitcoin network, so it's watching all these transactions coming in. And you can see here, this thing on the screen here with all this stuff scrolling by, these are Bitcoin transactions that are being broadcast right now. As I am talking, these are transactions that have been sent out to the network, they're being propagated around the world, validated, and so forth and so on. At the moment, there are currently a little over 11,000 transactions sitting in the mempool of the node that this website is sitting on top of. Okay. So that's a quick overview of Bitcoin transactions. Let's talk now about Bitcoin mining. You have probably heard of Bitcoin mining. It's this magical, mysterious way to get rich. It's not actually, but let's talk about how this actually works. What is Bitcoin mining? How does it work? Why is it important? Et cetera, et cetera. Now, before I can explain Bitcoin mining, I need to introduce two side concepts. And then we're going to take these concepts and plug them in to the explanation of Bitcoin mining. So the first concept I need to introduce is actually a mini game. Imagine here that these three lines are numbers. This is a game board. These numbers are binary. So each of these three numbers can be either a 0 or a 1. Let's also imagine that I have a button here, and when I push this button, each of these three numbers are assigned one of their possible values. So if I were to push this button, and each of these are assigned to 0 or 1, the number of possible values is 8. I can roll anything from a 0 to a 7. And let's also imagine that we have a target value. So the goal of the game is when you roll the dice, or when you push the roll button, and you generate a number, you want your number, when it's converted into base 10, to be lower than the target. So since the target is 4, and we have a possible range of values 0 to 7, we have a 50% chance of winning the game. 0 to 3 are winners, 4 to 7 are losers, so it's a 50-50 chance. So let's imagine that I click the button, I roll 0, 1, 1, that converts into base 10 as 3, and so the result is that I have won the game. Now, very quick, I promise this is relevant. I promise this is not a waste of time. I'm going to use this. It's important to understand it. Just bear with me. Now, real quick before we move on, I want to point out that it's possible to make this game more difficult in several ways. Number one, we can make the game more difficult by increasing the number of numbers. So if there were 4 fields instead of 3, everything else stayed the same, this would be much more difficult because we'd have 16 possible values instead of 8. We can also make the game more difficult by lowering the target value. Obviously, if the target was 3, we'd have less winning options and it'd be more difficult to win. And then finally, I want to point out that this game can be more difficult if we increased the base of the number. So if instead of base 2 numbers, we were using base 4 or base 10 or base 16, this game would be dramatically more difficult. Okay, so keep this minigame in mind. We're going to come back to it. The second important concept I need to introduce is hashing. Now, hashing is very commonly used in the computer world. I would say most well-known is password protection. People don't, or at least shouldn't, store passwords. Rather, they store password hashes. But for our purposes here, I'm going to do a quick overview of how hashing works. Basically, you're going to start with some glob of data. It's this string of text or whatever, and you're going to pass it into this magical, mysterious black box that does math with algorithms or whatever, and it will spit out, in this case, with SHA-256 hashing specifically, a 256-bit integer. Now, so it will spit out basically a really, really big number. Now there are well, let me give a quick example of this. Here is a phrase chosen perfectly at random, and if we pass this into a SHA-256 hashing mechanism, it will spit out this string of characters. Now, it's a 256-bit integer, is represented in base 16, so we'll need 64 characters to display it. But this is kind of what hashing looks like. Now, there are several important properties of hashing that we need to understand in order to grasp Bitcoin mining. The first concept that's important to know is that the output of a hash is unknown before the hash is finished. So if we look at a string of data, a string of text, we cannot know what the output hash is going to be without actually doing the hash. There's no way to predict it without just simply knuckling down and doing the work. The second important note is that you cannot use a desired output to calculate input. So if we are looking for a specific output hash, there's no way for us to figure out, okay, what do we need to put in the front end? What do we need to put into the black box to get the output that we're looking for? And this is sort of a related note to that whole concept is you cannot do slight adjustments to input to get the output, to sort of zero in on the output you're looking for. So again, if we're looking for a specific output hash and we find an input that gives us close to the hash that we're looking for, we can't go back to the input and tweak it a little bit to sort of zero in on the output we're looking for. And the reason for that is because if you make even the slightest adjustments to the input of your hash, the output is going to change wildly and in unpredictable ways. The fourth important point, and this of course is critical, is that the same input always gives the same output. So if I'm looking for a specific output hash and I actually find an input that gives me the output I'm looking for, I can then give that input to somebody else. They can plug it into the same hashing algorithm and verify that, yes, indeed, I did find a valid input that gives me the desired output. So real quick, let's look at an example of this to prove what I'm talking about here. So this is an online SHA-256 hashing generator, and I'm going to type in a phrase here. So all the forces in the world are not so powerful as an idea whose time has come. A favorite quote by Victor Hugo, I believe. You'll notice at the bottom of the screen here, we have the output hash from this input. And you may have noticed that as I was typing, it was sort of filling that in. So if we go down to another line and we repeat this, excuse me, all the forces in the world are not so powerful as an idea whose time... Oh, I made an error here. Let's go back and fix that. Okay, so notice I have typed in the same text and I have been given the exact same output. So if you find valid input, you can give it to someone else, they can verify it. I also want to point out that if I make the teensy weensiest adjustment here, I'm going to capitalize this I, the output is wildly different. There's a huge discrepancy between this number and the first one from just that tiny change. Okay, so we have introduced our two concepts. Let's switch back to the presentation here and put all this together. All right, so some of the nodes on the Bitcoin network are very special nodes. In addition to doing the validation and transaction and block propagation that we've been talking about, they're also doing mining. So Bitcoin mining is the competition to create the next block in the chain. Remember I said that every single node in the world has an identical copy of the blockchain. Bitcoin mining is the worldwide competition. So all the miners in the world are competing against each other to find the very next block, right? Now, the reason they're doing this is because whoever finds that block and propagates it out to the world receives newly created Bitcoins. And this is actually how Bitcoins are created, is they come into existence when a miner finds a block. Now, it's worth noting here, I think, that blocks get more difficult to find as more computing power and resources are used to search for them. The Bitcoin protocol is set up so that the goal is that one block will be found on average once every 10 minutes. Remember I pointed out that the mini game could get more difficult? Well, the protocol automatically adjusts the difficulty of finding blocks so that regardless of how many people are looking for them or how much power, hashing power is being used to find them, we're always going to have one Bitcoin block approximately once every 10 minutes. Okay, so keeping that in mind, how exactly does Bitcoin mining work? Like, what is the process or what is the procedure? On this slide, I want to offer a simplified explanation of how Bitcoin mining works. So a Bitcoin miner is going to take the hash of the most recent block in the blockchain. They're going to take the hash of the transactions that they want to include in the block. This is actually the root of a Merkle tree, so it's the hash of hashes of hashes of hashes of transactions. And finally, they're going to take the nonce. Now, a nonce is just a random number. It's just an integer. There's nothing magical about it. It is just a randomly selected number. They're going to take all these things, and again, this is simplification, but you'll get the idea. We're going to take all these things, we're going to pass them into our hashing function, and we're going to look at the output of that hash and ask the question, is the output lower than the target? If the answer is no, the output hash is higher than the target, then we've lost. And again, this is our minigame. I told you it would be relevant. This is where it comes into play. Bitcoin miners are playing that minigame all the time. So if you lose the game, your output is higher than the target, all you have to do is just try the game again with a new nonce. So we're going to pick a different random number, we're going to plug it back in, and we're going to go around and around and around again and again. Now, this minigame is being played right now. As I am talking, the miners around the world are playing this game approximately 50 quintillion times every second. And they're losing the game 50 quintillion times every second. This game is very difficult. But every once in a while, approximately once every 10 minutes, somebody wins the game. Somebody finds a combination of hashes and a nonce that gives them an output that's lower than target. That means they have won the game. They have found a Bitcoin block. They are going to bundle that up and send it out to the world as quick as possible so that they can be the next block in the blockchain. The other nodes are going to verify that block is correct. And again, it will be propagated around the globe very quickly. Okay, so what we're left with then with this mechanism is a continuous chain of hashes that stretches all the way back to the Genesis block. Because every block on the Bitcoin blockchain contains a hash of the previous block, you have an unbreakable chain that goes all the way back to the beginning. If you try to make any changes anywhere in the blockchain, the hashes will become invalid and people will recognize, hey, you tried to cheat the system, that's not valid, so we're just going to ignore what you've put in. And of course, the transaction hashes are also included, which means in addition to not being able to change in the blocks, you can't change in the transactions. So real quick, let's pop over to the browser again and look at an example here. This again is blockchain.info, blockchain.com/explorer, and these blocks here are the ones that have been mined while I've been talking. So if we pick 544791, we can open this up and look at some interesting details about it. First of all, this is the hash that was found for the block. This is the hash of the previous block right here. Down here we have the Merkle root. This is the hash of the transactions. Other interesting notes over here are, this is the difficulty level. You can see the difficulty has increased quite dramatically over the course of Bitcoin's life. The nonce down here, second from the bottom, this is the random number that was plugged into the hash that gave the magic output. And then this is the number of Bitcoins that were rewarded to this miner for finding the block. And down here, we can also see these are all the transactions that were included in this particular block. Okay, so why are we doing this? Why are we doing this big, complicated mining routine? It seems like a lot of work. It's very complicated. What is the point? Well, let me explain. Imagine that we have a blockchain. This is our nice, healthy blockchain. And let's also imagine that we have a dastardly do-badder who wants to attack the system. Let's imagine that he has completed some transaction in block number 8, and he wants that transaction to be reversed. Like he's trying to, like maybe he bought something and he's trying to, rip off the seller because he's going to get his money back or whatever. Now, the reason that we do all this mining business is because it makes the system incredibly difficult to attack. I would say it's, for all practical purposes, impossible. And here's why. In order for this villain to reverse his transaction or change history, he would need to find an alternate block 8. And he is welcome to try to find one. There's nothing stopping him from setting up his software to mine on top of block 7 and create an alternate block 8 that either does not include his transaction or it includes the money going back to himself or whatever. The problem for him is that it's so difficult to find blocks that even if he finds this block, he's not going to be able to do anything with it because the rest of the world is on block 10 and is looking for block 11. So while he's screwing around with block 8, the rest of the world has discovered block 11, 12, 13, and so on. Now he can keep doing this. He can say, okay, I need an alternate history block 9. But nobody is going to care about his, side chain, whatever you want to call it, unless and until his chain becomes longer than the real chain. And that is just not feasible. The total amount of hashing power that is currently being used to mine Bitcoins is about 50 exahashes per second. That is a mind-numbing number. Ironically, even if you had enough hashing power to, in theory, pull off one of these double spend attacks, you could make way more money by just mining Bitcoin. And this was one of Satoshi's great insights, is that the system depends on independent actors who don't trust each other acting in their own self-interest. So basically, anyone who is capable of attacking the network can make a lot more money by supporting the network and just, mining Bitcoin. Okay, so what are we left with? You put all this stuff together and we have a cryptocurrency blockchain that has several interesting properties. Number one, it is decentralized, which means nobody controls it. There are no central points of failure. It'll just run independently. It doesn't rely on any government or corporation um, to support it or validate it or anything like that. It just sort of runs on its own, if you will. It's also immutable, which means it's not possible to go back in time and change history. Once a transaction happens, it's there. You cannot undo it. And finally, it's unbreakable. As we just saw with our villain example, this system is, for all practical purposes, as far as we can tell, not possible to break. In the 9 or 10 years since Bitcoin was born, a lot of people have invested a lot of time and a lot of money into trying to break the system, and it just kind of chugs along more or less indifferent to those efforts. It really is quite extraordinary. Okay, here's the next important question. We have this big, elaborate blockchain currency mumbo jumbo. It's super secure, it's super fast, it's super cheap, or whatever. But who cares? Why do we want to bother with this? We as a society and as a globe, we have money already. It seems to work fine. What's all the fuss about? Well, let me start with an example. I want to give several reasons why cryptocurrency is an important evolution of the financial system, but I want to start with just a quick example that we can all relate to. So let's imagine that we go to the grocery store. We make our selections, we go to different aisles, we fill our cart, we go to the cash register. The friendly cashier rings up all the items, and she says to me, that will be $100. I say, okay, that sounds fair. I did buy a lot of Hot Pockets. So I take out my credit card or my debit card. I swipe it on that little machine. I punch in my numbers. It says approved, and I sign with the little stylus. She gives me my receipt, and I'm out the door. We've all seen this before. It happens a billion times a day. It's fast. It's easy. Like, what's the big deal? Well, believe it or not, several ridiculous things have just happened in that transaction. Let me run through them. Number one, for some reason, there is a third party involved in the transaction between me and the grocery store in the form of the credit card company or the bank. This party takes a cut of the transaction, and the percentage varies, of course, but a nice estimation would be 3.5%. So even though this company didn't have anything to do with me buying them or them selling them, is taking a 3.5% fee from the grocery bill. Now, your first thought may be like, oh, that's a real downer for the grocery store, because the grocery store has to pay that 3.5% fee, right? Well, no, that's not how that works. Credit card transaction processing fees are a line item on a budget somewhere, and the budget has to be balanced. So the grocery store does not pay for this fee. We, that is the consumers, pay this fee in the form of more expensive goods. So you're paying the fee, and I'm paying the fee. It's not the grocery store. The second ridiculous thing is that credit card transactions take about 5 to 7 business days to process. That is absolutely ridiculous. We can send information anywhere on the face of the earth at the speed of light almost, and it takes a week to process the transaction and settle the transaction for buying bagel bites and pizza pockets. Like, that's totally insane. The third crazy thing is I am giving the grocery store my credit card information. I am giving them all of the information they need to take money out of my bank account, or, of course, in the case of credit card, to add negative money to my bank account, which is basically the same thing. That's crazy. And that is a super dangerous. It opens me up to fraud, basically. I'm sure many of you have had a scenario where your credit card information has been stolen, and for me at least, I once had my bank call me and say, "Hey, did you just buy a surfboard in Spain?" And I said, "No, I sure didn't." And they said, "Okay, well, your credit card information has been stolen. We will send you a new one." That is the sort of danger that is opened up by giving your credit card info, your bank info, to what it effectively amounts to strangers. I have no idea who stole my card info, but somehow somebody got it, and that's what happens in this system. So the fourth ridiculous thing is the signature. We are signing our names on these little devices or on a little piece of paper, and you know, it's all security theater. It doesn't actually make us any safer. It's kind of like the TSA line at the airport. It's just there to help people pretend that they're safer and that they're safer than they actually are. And we all kind of like to, subconsciously pretend that there's like a kindly old gentleman at the bank that's comparing our signature with the one they have on file to make sure. No, it doesn't happen. Nobody ever looks at it. It's just a huge waste of time. Okay, and the fifth ridiculous thing is chargebacks. This system makes it trivially easy to defraud the retailer. Like you buy something, they accept a transaction, then you go home, you call your bank, and you contest it, and they reverse the transaction, and now you've effectively robbed the store. This is another cost that the store has to absorb, and again, it's a cost that takes the form of higher prices of goods because, again, the store has to offset that cost somehow. So we, that is the consumers, pay the cost of doing business in the form of chargebacks. Okay, so all these stupid things are happening whenever we do our regular credit card or debit card transactions. Let's look at what this same transaction looks like in the cryptocurrency world. So I go to the same grocery store, I buy the same bagel bites, I go to the same cash register, and we ring it up, I get the total. This is what the routine will be. There will be a device of some kind, bolted to the cash register, and these kinds of things exist already. You've seen like Google Pay and Apple Pay or whatever they are. I will take my device and I will touch it to this mobile terminal, and it will use some sort of near-field communication technology to send 3 pieces of information back to my phone. So again, the cashier says, "Hey, that'll be $100." I pull up my phone, I touch it to this device, and the device gives 3 pieces of info. Those pieces of information are, number 1, the cryptocurrency address of the store. Number 2, and by the way, remember, that crypto address is public. You can share it with anyone without fear of danger. Number 2, the total cost, like how much currency do you owe us in exchange for these goods. And number 3, and this one's optional, it doesn't have to be sent over, but it's probably a good idea to do it. That's the name of the store. So my phone or my device, whatever we're using in this mystical future, will display this information to me. It'll say, "Hey, do you want to pay $100 to this store?" And it will say yes or no. I will click the yes button, and my phone will construct the valid transaction and broadcast that to the network. That transaction will be propagated and validated all across the world, and within a couple of seconds, the node that the grocery store is running will see that transaction, validate it. It knows which transaction belongs to which address because a unique address is created for each one. And it will then send a message back to the point of sale terminal saying, "Hey, that looks good." So I want to emphasize here the user experience. Me as the person buying the stuff, the cash register lady says, "That'll be $100 or 100 Bitcoins or whatever token we're using." She says, "That'll be 100 units of currency." I pull out my phone, I touch it to the device, it says, "Pay this much, yes or no." I click yes, and I'm done. So it's super fast and super simple from a user experience perspective. It's very easy to do this. Okay, so let's revisit our ridiculous things and compare them to the cryptocurrency world. So in the old days, in the today days, there was a third party involved in the transaction, taking a cut. With cryptocurrency, there is no third party. The only people involved in the transaction are myself and the grocery store. And those are the only people that should be involved in the transaction because those are the only people involved in the transaction. Because there's no third party, there's no fee. So everything is cheaper. It's hard for me to stress. These credit card companies, make billions of dollars every year. And this is all they do, is they sit between 2 parties and they take a cut off the top for themselves. In the old days, it took 5 to 7 business days for a transaction to be processed. And again, this is totally insane. With cryptocurrency, the transaction is not only validated, but included in the blockchain within a couple of minutes, making it unchangeable. It's permanent. The transaction is validated within a couple of seconds, but it's in the blockchain within a couple of minutes, again, depending, as long as you've got a properly functioning cryptocurrency. The third thing is the credit card info. With cryptocurrency, no private information is exchanged. So with the old system, I was giving the grocery store all the information they needed to take money out of my bank account. With the new system, they are giving me the information I need to put money into their account. So I'm perfectly safe. Like I cannot be exposed to fraud with this mechanism because, again, I'm not sharing any private information. The fourth thing, the signature. Now, in cryptocurrency, there's still a signature, but it's a real signature. It is a cryptographic signature, which means it cannot be counterfeit. It's like, instead of a pretend signature where you just scribble on a paper and it does nothing, it's a real signature. Like, only the person who controls my private key can do this. So it's valid. Again, it's unbreakable security. And finally, of course, there's no chargebacks. The grocery store does not have to worry that I'm just going to, buy this television, then go to the parking lot, and then reverse the transaction, and then I've just been robbed. No, once the transaction happens, there's no way to reverse it. So instead of both of us being exposed to fraud, me and a grocery store, neither of us are exposed to fraud. It's just better in every meaningful way to use cryptocurrency instead of the old system. But this is just one example. There are other cryptocurrency uses. Micropayments. Let's say that you really enjoyed a YouTube video and you want to give the creator 12 cents. Okay, well, you can't do that with the old system. I can't feasibly, practically send 12 cents through the internet, like with PayPal, or, put a check in the mail or whatever. You just can't do it practically. With micropayments, you can. Let's say you would like to view a website without any ads in exchange for a fraction of a penny every time you visit the page. Okay, well, you can do that with cryptocurrency. I can send a tiny amount of money. Let's say there's a gumball machine over there, and I want a gumball. Costs 25 cents. I can't write a check or use my credit card, and I hate carrying metal coins. So, hey, cryptocurrency. You can have a gumball machine that accepts cryptocurrency. Okay, it's also good for mega payments. Like, hey, do you want to buy that aircraft carrier? Yeah, you can do that. Like, you can send any amount of money using the same system that we were using to buy our bagel bites at the grocery store. Like, there's no restrictions on the amount of money, and because there's no percentage-based fee, you can buy enormous things with cryptocurrency without wasting a huge amount of money. Like, if you want to buy that aircraft carrier, but you don't want to pay, 3% to the bank or financial institution that's handling that, then I suggest using cryptocurrency. Or let's say, for example, that you are a sovereign nation prosecuting a war in another country, and you have contractors working in that country for you, doing, an assortment of things, and you need to pay them. So you have a need to pay somebody somewhere over there, like in another country. Well, if you're the United States government, what you might do is load a whole bunch of airplanes with many tons, like hundreds of tons of $100 bills, and you'll put some saran wrap on them, and you'll put little clips on them, and you'll send it over into a war zone. Now, this article that I have on the screen, this was published by The Guardian in 2003, basically making fun of the United States government for doing just that. The United States sent $12 billion in cash into Iraq, into a war zone, and you'll never guess what happened. Most of it, or a huge chunk of it, just kind of walked away. We have no idea where it went. It just kind of, vanished into the ether. Now, I like to imagine that there's like a general in the Pentagon yelling into a phone, what do you mean it's gone? We put saran wrap on it. It's like, oh my gosh. Now, quick aside, real talk, nothing but respect for the military and the armed forces. Come from an armed forces family myself. Nothing but respect. But still, this was just awful. With cryptocurrency, you don't have this problem. Like, if the United States needed to do this again, would they do the same thing? I don't know. Maybe they would. What they should do when you have a need to send money across, into a dangerous location or into wherever, use cryptocurrency. Super fast, super secure. You know exactly where it went. It's just not possible for something like this to happen. Or here's another example. This was a situation where New Zealand needed to send a whole bunch of money to a bank in Hong Kong. And what they did was they filled a whole bunch of duffel bags with paper, with money made out of paper, and they put these bags on an airplane, and some of the bags disappeared. They saw on security footage what happened. The bags were being carried by one of those baggage trolleys, and one of the bags fell off the trolley while it was turning a corner. Like, this is straight out of a comedy. And after that, the bag disappeared. Now, we as a species have sequenced the human genome, and we've put SUVs on the surface of Mars, and we're doing all this amazing stuff. And this is how we move value around. We put paper in bags, and they fall off baggage carriages. It's totally insane. Cryptocurrency, you make the exchange, you send the transfer, super fast, super secure, super cheap. It's just, again, it's just better in every way. Okay, so the next item, cross-border payments. This kind of ties in with what we were just talking about. Cryptocurrency makes it trivially easy to send money across international borders. Now, excuse me, the question of whether or not this is a good thing depends, of course, on the context. For example, if you are a hacker that has installed ransomware on a person's computer and encrypt all the files, and you demand payment in cryptocurrency, well, that's evil. That's an example of that mechanism being used for bad. Maybe you are a freedom fighter living under the authoritarian rule of a totalitarian dictatorship, and you want to move capital out of the country. You want to get around the capital controls. Well, with cryptocurrency, it's laughably easy to do that. There's nothing they can do to stop you to move money across borders. Or maybe you are a migrant worker, like you have moved from one country to another looking for work, and you want to send some of your income back home to your family. Well, you could use one of the corporations that offers that as a service and charges exorbitant fees. I mean, this is like criminal, the fees that they charge for this. It was like a $600 billion industry in 2015. Or you can use cryptocurrency and send it for free and instantly, and it's just way better. Or maybe you're a drug lord. Maybe you need to move huge amounts of money and you don't want the government to be able to stop you, or you don't want them to even know that the transaction is happening. Cryptocurrency can be used for that. So again, the point I want to make is that you can send money across borders. You can use that tool for good, or you can use the tool for evil. My point is that the technology exists. It's never going to stop existing, and there is a need for it, so it will be used. Let me add a quick note onto this slide. I heartily encourage you to observe and follow all relevant rules and laws and ordinances for your place of residence. I do not encourage you to break the law. If you do, men with guns will come for you. They'll take you away and they will lock you up, so don't do that. Okay, next item. Cryptocurrency is also useful for value storage. The United States dollar, for example, has lost approximately 97% of its value in the last 100 years. This is a result of just endless printing by the government. You have fractional reserve banking practices from all the financial institutions. They basically allows them to just generate dollars out of nothing, and as a result, it costs money to hold money. If you take your dollars and you just put them in your bank account or you put them under your mattress, that you are losing money every single day. Current rate of inflation in the United States, I think, is about 2.9%. So it costs money to hold money. With cryptocurrency, the rate of inflation is either zero or it's programmed, depending on which cryptocurrency you're talking about. But at the very least, it's predictable, so you can account for it. Or again, in some cases, it just doesn't exist. Cryptocurrency also provides for the ability to bank the unbanked. Now, what I'm talking about here are the poorest people in the world. The poorest countries have no access to the traditional global financial system because traditional banks have no incentive at all to set up a set up a branch in these locations. There's just no reason for them to go there because they just can't make any money. With cryptocurrency, the only thing that a person needs to have access to a global financial system is access to the internet. And global access to the internet is not far off. We are very close to the situation where every single person on the face of the earth that wants access to the internet can have access to the internet. Okay, and finally, last note I want to make here is that cryptocurrency offers protection from the incompetence and or corruption of politicians. The people who run the government, even those that have the very best of intentions, have a track record of ruining currency. The huge majority of fiat currencies, those currencies that have been generated by a centralized government or sovereign nation, have eventually devalued to zero. And, there are several examples of this. I mean, right now, you have all this foolishness going on in Venezuela. You have the infamous example of the Zimbabwe dollar. You have the Weimar Republic in post-World War I Germany. Like, history is saturated with examples of average, everyday citizens suffering because the currency that they have been relying on and using over the years it's just not worth anything anymore. And it's all kinds of suffering and misery that result from that. And in the huge majority of cases, it is the responsibility or it is the politicians who are to blame, again, either from corruption or incompetence. And again, it's the people that suffer. If you are using a currency that is not controlled by your government, then you are not subject to those unpleasant trees. And again, with cryptocurrency, not controlled by any government, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, this is an abbreviated list. There are more items that could be added to this list, but we have other things to talk about, so I'm going to move on. I just want to make the point, I want to make the case that cryptocurrency is better than the existing system in every meaningful way. There are no advantages to the old system. The new system, cryptocurrency, is far superior, and I suspect it's just a matter of time before the world realizes that and switches over. But again, we have other stuff to talk about, so let's move on. Okay. So we have this Bitcoin system. We have this blockchain mechanism. It seems pretty cool. A few years have gone by. It's now 2014. People are looking at this system, this blockchain system, and they're saying, this is pretty cool. I wonder what else we could do with it. Now, Bitcoin has a very restrictive scripting language. What I mean by that is that the programmability of Bitcoin is very limited. Its primary function is to move coins from one person to another. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what the system is for. And simplicity begets security. Like, it's a very simple system, so it's very difficult to break it, and so forth and so on. But people started asking the question like, what happened if we have a more robust scripting language that was capable of doing more things? And thus was born Ethereum. So Ethereum has a scripting language which is called Solidity that is Turing complete. And what that means is that any computational task that can be executed by a quote-unquote traditional computer can be executed on Ethereum, like in an Ethereum contract. So that opens up an enormous plethora of opportunities. Like, you can write programs that have all the same security and global decentralization and speed and efficiency of the blockchain that can do way more than just Bitcoin can do. So Ethereum was the brainchild of an actual child. It was created by then 19-year-old Vitalik Buterin. Uh, Vitalik is one of these child super geniuses that we're all secretly jealous of. He's one of these, yeah, college is boring. I'm just going to go be a billionaire right now. You know the type. He is the one who originally described Ethereum and is largely responsible for its creation, and he is still an important figure in the Ethereum space. I actually had the privilege of talking to him, sort of, on Reddit a year or two ago. I asked a question in the Ethereum subreddit, and Vitalik himself responded to me. When I saw this, I freaking flipped out. I was like, total fanboy, like, waving my hands in my face, like, oh my gosh, it's Vitalik. So yeah, this is Vitalik and I are pretty much BFFs at this point. I mean, we're just like that. I responded to him like a doofus, super embarrassing, but this is still a high point of my cryptocurrency career. Anyway, let's talk about what makes Ethereum different. What is the difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin? Well, on Ethereum, some of the accounts are more than just wallets. On Bitcoin, pretty much everything is just a wallet that sends coins back and forth. On Ethereum, some of the accounts on the network are not just wallets, they're actually programs. These programs are called contracts. Now, the network token on Ethereum is called Ether. This token is used to pay for the execution of computational tasks. So there's a program out on the Ethereum network. I want to use it to do stuff. I send it my command, and I send it a tiny amount of Ether, and that Ether is used to execute the code line by line. So without Ether, you're not going to have the contract executed. It's just a very efficient system. Now, in preparation for this presentation, I actually built my very own Ethereum contract. I created a cryptocurrency called ThanahCoin. It's named after my cat. And I deployed it to the Ethereum network. Now, normally, when I give this presentation, it includes a live demonstration of the coin. We look at a block explorer so we can see the transactions actually happening. We generate a real transaction that hits the contract. We see it come back. But for this online version, I have actually pulled out all of that content and put it into a separate video. So if you are interested in the technical details of how a contract works and you'd like to see an example of an Ethereum contract in action, please go ahead and watch that video. I've put a link down in the description. Before I move on, though, I want to make a couple of quick notes about this. This contract that I made, this cryptocurrency that I made, is not a groundbreaking program, but I do want to make a few notes about it. First of all, I want to note that I did not have to ask anyone's permission to do this, right? From my dining room table, I wrote a program and deployed it to a globally distributed supercomputer without asking for anyone's permission, right? I didn't have to talk to a sales guy. I didn't have to create an account or buy a subscription. I just did it. It was a few hours of work, and I paid about 17 cents to execute the constructor code and deploy it to the network. That's it. I also want to note that as long as any computer anywhere in the world continues running the Ethereum software and validating transactions and maintaining the network, my program will never be offline and it will never cease to exist. Anyone, anywhere in the world can at any time interact with my application, and there is no government or corporation on the face of the earth that is capable of shutting it down. No one can censor it, no one can seize it, no one can freeze it. This is a platform for pure permissionless innovation. This is the power of Ethereum. Dramatic pause. So, what can you do with a system like this? Well, the first thing I want to say is that I don't think it's possible for us to predict all of the things that a platform like Ethereum can be used for. Blockchain right now is approximately the same age as the internet was in 1979. And just as a computer scientist in the 70s would never have been able to predict or even dream of what the internet would become, I think that we here today in the 2010s cannot predict what blockchain is going to be used for in the future. It is a very open platform. It has extraordinary potential, but let me, on this slide, offer a few examples of use cases that I think right now would be useful for this. First of all, you can decentralize, if not everything, most things. Any situation where you have a trusted third party acting as a middleman between two other parties, you have an opportunity for a blockchain contract to come in and serve as the middleman for free and way faster. Like it's just this is a very generic example that can be applied to a wide plethora of situations. A second example is, and this is another generic one, record keeping. So I'm thinking here about things like supply chain management. You have all these different companies interacting with each other, moving raw materials around, moving semi-finished products around, moving components around. You need to know like where everything is, who has been paid, all this stuff. It's a very complicated system. Blockchain would be an amazing use case for supply chain management. Centralize everything into one decentralized system so everyone's using the same system but no one has to trust anyone else. It's just fantastic. Or medical records. Imagine your medical records, they follow you everywhere you go. It's on a public blockchain, but it's encrypted, so no one has access to it except you and your medical care provider. It's fantastic. Blockchain platform would be excellent for this. And another example is property history. Like, I want to see a record of everything that happened with this car, or this house that I want to buy, or this boat, or whatever. Like, every time a contractor does work on a house, or every time a mechanic does work on a car, they just make a note of it. It goes into the blockchain, and then again, that can be reviewed by anyone who's considering purchasing this property in the future. Another use case is underutilized resource trading. So I'm thinking here, for example, of computational resources. So let's say I am a graphics designer. I want to render this 3D movie. I have a beefy computer, but it's still going to take that computer, 30 hours to do this. I don't really want to wait for 30 hours. So I'm going to use a blockchain platform to send out my job to the world, and a whole bunch of other computers are going to do the work and send me the finished product back. And then when I'm not rendering anything, I can use my own computer to be a node on the system and actually get paid to do other people's work. So that's an example of underutilized resource trading. A related example would be hard drive space. So I want to store a bunch of stuff. I don't have enough space. I can store it on other people's stuff in an encrypted form and have access to it anytime I need it. Or maybe electricity. Let's say I have, my neighbor and I have solar panels in our house. We're harvesting all this electricity, but I'm going to be out of town for a couple weeks, and they're going to have a whole bunch of guests. Our houses could just automatically exchange electricity for a few tokens of some cryptocurrency. That can happen with a blockchain platform, and the humans don't even have to be involved. You can also have things like provably fair voting, provably fair gambling, provably fair auditing. That's super easy. These are, voting, gambling. These are things that we do today, and we always have to rely on some, organizing body, some government, some trusted third party to tell us, yep, everything's fair, everything's up on the up and up. With blockchain, we don't have to trust anyone. We can look at the code, we can look at the transactions, and we can see, yes, this is fair. A blockchain also opens a door to things like uncensorable journalism. This is your First Amendment stuff right here. Like, if you as a human have access to a globally distributed blockchain platform and you can write to it, then your voice cannot be silenced. Anyone who is interested in listening to you can listen to you. And same thing with things like public forums and, of course, blog articles and any other kind of articles that you might want to post. Okay, and finally you have things like prediction markets. Like this, a little self-explanatory. Like if you're interested in this, check out Augur is a platform that does this kind of stuff. Okay, so let's talk about the future. We've talked about blockchain, we've talked about Bitcoin, we've talked about Ethereum. What does the future hold? Well, I want to make two predictions. The first prediction I want to make is that sometime in the future, we will have switched to a global or maybe a couple of very large-scale cryptocurrencies. I think there is a very real need for the service or the mechanism, whatever you want to call it, that cryptocurrency provides. Now, at the moment, these five that I have on the screen are the leading contenders, with Bitcoin Cash being number one. Now, I have no idea if any of these five are going to be the coin or the coins that the world ends up using. All I'm claiming right now is that these five are the current leading contenders. They are the largest in terms of market cap and volume. Now, you may be asking yourself, you may be wondering, where's Bitcoin? Why is Bitcoin not on this list of potential world-changing cryptocurrencies? Well, last year, on August 1st, 2017, the Bitcoin network split into two competing projects. Now, the story behind this split is long and complicated and terribly aggravating. But here, let me give you a very brief summary, or very brief overview. The Bitcoin project has been successfully captured by a single for-profit company called Blockstream. Their business model is to cripple Bitcoin and to build their own services on top of it that they can charge people to access. Now, it's an incredibly foolish idea because there are just so many other cryptocurrencies that do everything instantly and for free. Why would anyone use that? But nevertheless, that is their goal. And so far, they have been very successful at crippling Bitcoin. Bitcoin is, by orders of magnitude, the slowest and most expensive cryptocurrency that exists. Last year, when we had high volumes during the crazy bull run, Bitcoin transactions could cost $50, $70, $100, and the mempool was not cleared for months at a time. Like, it was just hundreds of thousands of transactions waiting to be processed, just sitting because of how effectively Blockstream has crippled Bitcoin. Bitcoin Cash exists because of people like me who are simply not interested in a coin like that. I just have no use for a cryptocurrency that's slow and expensive and unreliable and so forth and so on. So Bitcoin Cash split off and to do its own thing. It now has a very healthy community of developers competing with each other to generate the best code. It is very enthusiastic about scaling, and indeed, just a few weeks ago, they successfully did a global stress test where they performed millions of transactions in a single day, and the network didn't even bat an eye. Like, it is the potential of this system to scale is looking very promising, and this is one of my favorite cryptocurrencies right now. So again, all that to say, if you are interested in an open cryptocurrency that works great, it's cheap, it's fast, it has all the security that I have just been talking about, I encourage you to not use Bitcoin. Have a look at these five. Again, there are other cryptocurrencies. I am not explicitly endorsing these particular five. I'm just saying these are the leading contenders right now. Okay, so that's my first prediction, is that in the future, the world is going to be using cryptocurrency in some form or other. It's just better than the old system in every way. What's my second prediction? Well, I am convinced that the world also has a need for the sort of globally distributed blockchain platform that Ethereum offers. So my prediction is that in the future, Ethereum or something very much like it, there are competitors to Ethereum, is going to be used on a large scale for a wide range of use cases. I've given a few examples, but as I mentioned, I believe that there are many more examples that we haven't even thought of yet. Now, again, it may not be Ethereum, but here's a point I want to make. This slide shows the top 100 the top 100 blockchain projects that are not cryptocurrencies. So you can think of these as projects that are built on top of blockchain platforms that are, meant to be real-world use cases. So these are the top 100. These ones highlighted in green are built on top of Ethereum. So it is very difficult to overstate how important Ethereum is to the blockchain space. Again, it may not be the one that wins out in the end, but it does have a huge network effect. It is the first mover, and it has an excellent development team that's working on all kinds of protocol improvements. So this, of all the blockchain platforms for that are open for development, Ethereum is the one that I am the most excited about, and it is currently the largest and most heavily used. Real quick, this slide is a collection of projects that are built on blockchains that I think are interesting. Let me stress and emphasize that I am not endorsing any of these. I'm not giving any kind of financial advice or anything like that. I include these projects on this slide simply because I think they are interesting. And several of them I am excited to see what the future holds, and I invite you to look into some of them yourself. Okay, so let's say that you've been all riled up by this presentation. You're super gung-ho about cryptocurrency and blockchain all of a sudden. How do you get started? Well, I encourage you to just try it out on a super small scale. If you're interested in just playing around with Ethereum or Bitcoin Cash or whatever, check out Coinbase.com. They are a great first step into the cryptocurrency space. Super easy to create a wallet. They have a solid user interface, and they have a great support staff. So this is where I like to point new people. Coinbase.com, check it out, download the app, and practice sending a couple of dollars worth of Bitcoin Cash between you and your friends. Let me also encourage you to find a video of Vitalik talking about anything and watch it. The man is a genius. And he also has a fantastic accent, so it's always a pleasure to listen to him talk about stuff. And I invite you to do that same thing. Let me also encourage you to avoid these two spaces. I mentioned blockchain and their takeover of Bitcoin. They were able to do that because they have total control over the largest public Bitcoin spaces. These two, in particular, Bitcoin.org and the Bitcoin subreddit, are heavily and aggressively censored. If you say anything that disagrees with blockchain's business model, your comment will be deleted and you'll be banned. I don't want you to think that this is some crazy conspiracy theory, though. So I invite you, if you do not believe me, go to one of these places and start quoting Satoshi Nakamoto and his vision for, a free and open cryptocurrency, and start asking questions like, hey, how is anyone supposed to use this for real world things if the transactions are so expensive? I promise you, you will be banned, and that will make my case that these are heavily censored. Here are the alternates. The BTC subreddit was created in response to the Bitcoin subreddit after me and all my friends were banned from Bitcoin for speaking truth. We created BTC, and it is now one of the largest cryptocurrency spaces on Reddit. Bitcoin.com is also an excellent resource for just learning about Bitcoin and getting started. And the Ethereum subreddit is very well moderated. They ban all fluff talk and price speculation, all that stuff. And this is a great place to learn about the interesting projects that are currently going on in the Ethereum platform, and just to ask and learn about technical issues, upcoming protocol changes. The Ethereum subreddit is a great resource. Okay, if you want to get a little more technical, I encourage you again to try out ThanahCoin. This is a cryptocurrency that I created myself. There's a link to the YouTube video below. It's super simple, 10 to 15 minutes. You can do the demo yourself. And give that a try if you'd like to experiment with actually executing a transaction on the Ethereum network and broadcasting it out to be verified. I also invite you to read the Bitcoin and Ethereum white papers. The Bitcoin white paper in particular is, I would say, a milestone in the history of computer science. It is a very readable white paper. It's only about 8 pages long, and it's not super duper technical. So, I mean, I would think most people should be able to pick that up and consume it and digest it, and if not being blown away, at least have an appreciation for how amazing it is. The Ethereum white paper is also very good. It's much longer, and it does get a little more technical, but it also offers a great overview of the blockchain space thus far. It includes sort of an explanation of how Bitcoin works and how Ethereum is different. It's a fantastic resource. And if you want to learn more about the philosophy of of Satoshi. This is a great book. The Book of Satoshi by Phil Champagne. Um, I included the picture of V at the very beginning of this presentation. The picture, of course, was not Satoshi Nakamoto. It was V from V for Vendetta. The reason I did that is because that's the picture that pops into my mind every time I think about Satoshi. Uh, and the reason for that is Satoshi and V had similar political ideologies, shall we say. But that's another talk for another time. For now, this book is a collection of Satoshi's writings. It includes his very early forum posts, some email exchanges that he had, and it's a great insight into why he did this and why he created this system and what his beliefs were in terms of financial freedom and governments and all that stuff. Great book. If you want to get super duper technical, this is a great resource. Mastering Bitcoin is available online, and it gets way down into the nuts and bolts of how Bitcoin transaction works, how mining works. I mean, we're talking it's down to the bits and bytes of everything. If you're curious about that, I encourage you to check this out. Okay. The question and answer session for this presentation has always been a blast. I gave this talk at the Dayton.net developer group several months ago, and the Q&A session lasted like 45 minutes. And the only reason it stopped is because it was getting really late and people had to go home. Obviously, I can't do a live Q&A on a recorded video, but if you have questions or if you have comments, whether they're nice or whether they're mean, I encourage you to leave them in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer those questions and respond to them. But that's all I have for this presentation. I sincerely thank you for your very kind attention, and I encourage you to go out and learn more about blockchains and cryptocurrencies. Thank you.